Lovely to see you both. Let's kick off with Kamala Harris's interview with Fox News' Bret Baier. He's not quite the Rottweiler that other Fox News interviewers are, but what's the reason, Tony, for her stepping into, frankly, a channel that's not going to be a huge supporter of hers?
Well, there's been a lot of criticism of Kamala's media strategy over the last few weeks. Firstly, she did barely any interviews for the first few weeks of the campaign. And then she did what was billed as a media blitz by her campaign, which basically meant that she did a lot of interviews with outlets that already really like her, including a glowing profile in Vogue with a lovely photo shoot on the front page and a nice write-up of how everything was going for her. She got a lot of flack for that. A lot of people saying she's not been in the race for very long. She replaced Joe Biden and she's not submitted herself to proper media scrutiny. So the Fox interview was kind of a response to that, was to say, look, I can take on these, hard-headed right-wing journalists and I can come out on top. So that's really why I think she did the Fox interview earlier this week. And Bret Baier is a very good journalist. He's very experienced. He hosts a lot of the debates that Fox run. But he gave her a pretty tough ride.
Let's listen to the part where she was grilled on Joe Biden's administration's record on immigration. And probably one of the standout moments of the interview was when Baier played Harris a clip of the mother of Rachel Morin, who was allegedly raped and murdered by an illegal immigrant in Maryland last year.
I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now. I do not believe in decriminalizing border crossings, and I've not done that as vice president. I will not do that as president.
A very powerful clip, and Bret Baier, I think, really focusing on the lack of action by President Joe Biden and the Democrats over the past 4 years on tackling this issue of illegal immigration. I think for her response, Kamala Harris didn't actually, again, get to the heart of the issue she was being asked about, which was, why didn't you act earlier?
Yes, and I think, what Bret Baier is really tapping into there is both the legislative question of why the Biden administration has failed to do more on this issue. Baier did point out in the interview that, for the first 2 years, Democrats did have a strong hand to play in Congress. So there was more of a legislative mechanism in place there for them to do more. But also it was, a messaging issue. This is an issue that Kamala Harris has repeatedly ducked for the last 3.5 years.
Tony, in general, was this a wasted opportunity for Harris? I mean, she's going on Fox. She's almost like trying to grasp the nettle. And yet there aren't really any major news lines that she's landed. Okay, she hasn't dropped the ball anywhere. There haven't been any clangers. But she sort of appeared to be a bit unsure of herself. She didn't criticize anything that Biden had done, so therefore she finds it difficult to kind of separate herself from what's gone before. And there was nothing particularly to write home about in this interview.
Yeah, I think the strategy of this interview is really interesting, actually, because if you're the Harris campaign in this situation, you say, right, well, do we go out and sell a really positive message of what we want to do? Do you lay out all the policy that she's announced, lots of stuff on the economy, stuff on migration, all the other policy she's announced during this campaign? Or do you just spend the entire half an hour attacking Donald Trump in the hope that these Republicans who watch Fox News all the time, who are tuning in to watch, their favourite anchor interview her, do you just attack Donald Trump and try and pull some of those voters away from the Republican Party? And she went for the second one. So in the answer to every single question, including on the economy, where she has a lot to sell in terms of policy, she just attacked Donald Trump. The answer to every single question was, Donald Trump's plan is bad. Donald Trump ruined this when he was president 4 years ago. Donald Trump's next steps in the White House are going to be to destroy democracy, whatever. She didn't really talk about her own policy at all. Now, obviously, the proof will be in the pudding when we see on the 5th of November whether or not that message has worked. But I would say if you're addressing Republicans who already like Donald Trump, just attacking him is perhaps not the best strategy. Maybe what you need to do is say, well, look, here's what Trump's saying on the economy. He wants tariffs. He wants to go after China. He wants to get rid of taxes on tips and overtime pay and that kind of thing. Well, here's what I'm going to do instead, and here's why it's better. She didn't really do that. So what we got was actually quite a combative interview where you had an obviously sympathetic interviewer from Fox who was putting a lot of Trump's talking points to her, and her simply attacking the man that all of the viewers love. And for me, it didn't feel like that was a hugely successful strategy. I personally, if I was running the Harris campaign, would have been getting into some of the policy detail and showing that she knows her stuff more than he does on the big issues that voters care about, and the economy is top of the list.
I think that's absolutely right, Tony. What she needed to do there was reassure very soft Trump voters who could be persuaded to possibly change their vote, and that's a very small number of people, that she could be trusted on the economy, and that basing that on some of Biden's, what has Biden done to help working people feel richer at the end of the last 4 years than at the beginning, and secondly, what she's going to do to build on any of those successes. So I think she failed on the reassurance message. She didn't actually answer the key immigration question that was being put to her. And also, she had, and we've heard this here, haven't we, Camilla, the blame the other lot strategy. She kept talking about the chaos of the past. And Brett Baier quite rightly kept pointing out, hold on, you've been in power for 4 years. So, and then she kept saying, no, the last 10 years. And it's always a mistake for parties looking to win elections, as you suggest, Tony, to blame the electorate for voting for the wrong person, because not only are the people who've watched Fox generally backers of Trump, they also are very likely to have voted for him in 2016. And it's always very difficult for voters to hear, you were stupid enough to vote for this idiot, which is broadly what she was trying to get across. I did think she was a little stronger on the economy, but having watched it all, I think that strategically she didn't get out of that interview what she could have done.
Yeah, I think there's the other aspect for Harris, I think, is that she's trying to run a change campaign. She's trying to run the campaign that says everything has gone wrong, I'm going to fix it. But she's the continuity candidate in this election. You know, she's got to walk this difficult line between distancing herself enough from Biden that all of the people that hated him might still vote for her, but also taking credit for some of the stuff that his administration has done well. And Trump can run a straightforward change campaign because he's not in government. He is the change. He would be the change if he was to win the election. She's got a very interesting hybrid campaign going on here where she sort of wants to talk about Biden when things have gone well, but as soon as things have gone wrong, she says, oh, well, it would all be different under my administration. I don't think that's that persuasive to voters. But on your point about these switching voters and switching Republicans, if I can give you a sneak peek into some of the stuff that we're working on at the moment, if you actually drill down into the polling data and look in the swing states, which are, of course, as we know, are the only states that really matter, how many 2020 Biden voters are planning to vote for Trump in this election versus how many 2020 Trump voters who are planning to vote for Harris? Those are the groups of voters who matter the most here because they're the ones who are going to shift the result compared to what happened the last time. And what you see is that there are a lot more Biden voters who are now planning to vote for Trump. And actually, when you strip out all the noise and all the stuff going on, all the rows about, did Kamala Harris really work at McDonald's and what's going on, are people eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio? That's the number that really matters. And at the moment, Trump is doing a lot better there.
We're going to get onto swing states in a moment because I know, Rozina, you've been to Georgia and spoken to voters there. But before we do that, can we please talk about this really weird Trump rally where he gave up the Q&A to start sort of dancing to his favourite tunes? I was first made aware of this because my 15-year-old daughter sent me a video and said, Mum, watch this. This is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I thought, it's funny, but it's a bit weird. What went on?
Well, there were two medical emergencies in the audience. The first one, Donald Trump paused and they made way for the medical team to get to the audience member and then continued. And then when the second incident took place, Donald Trump said, how about we stop these questions? Wouldn't it be fun if I just play favourite tunes? And we actually know that he plays DJ at Mar-a-Lago when he's hosting Republican officials. And we know what some of his favourites are. And sure enough, you know, Pavarotti, James Brown were all on the playlist of that event, that town hall.
It's so odd, Rozina. I mean, I'm assuming that in America this has no effect on the polling, but if that kind of thing happened here, it would be an absolute disaster for anyone running for office to be seen sort of swaying around. And his choice of he had YMCA on there. It's a man's world. Sinead O'Connor, Nothing Compares to You. I wonder whether there's a sort of liberal cultural sort of hero inside Trump somewhere. Because a lot of the tunes, I mean, YMCA is genuinely the world's gay anthem. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. It's a man's world, but it means nothing without a woman, i.e., that's Kamala Harris, presumably. Nothing Compares to You by Sinead O'Connor, fantastic sort of liberal campaigner, obviously so sadly dead now. It just seems like an odd mix of materials.
Yeah, and as you say, not many candidates could pull that off and not face more questions about. I mean, can you imagine if Kamala Harris had got up on stage and done that? Pointed out, but I suppose it's part of the appeal of Donald Trump, right, for his supporters, is that he is quirky and does things that you wouldn't necessarily anticipate, and does break the mold.
On a slightly more on a much more serious note, he did say about using. He talked about the enemies of the people. Now, this has been a riff for Donald Trump for a long time, that there are people in America who hate America, and he spoke about that, enemies of the people, but he pushed himself again, and this has been alongside the Kamala Harris's appearance on Fox. This has been one of the sort of talking points of the week about possibly using the National Guard, and if not the National Guard, actually the US Army, against the enemies of the people. I mean, Tony, what's your response? Does that affect anything, or as you say, Rozina, is that just more of the Donald? Because again, looking at it from the outside, from the UK, that sounds chilling. And surely one of the basic foundational principles of the US Constitution is the president is not able to use the forces of the state against his enemies.
I think it's worth pointing out that it's not the first time that Donald Trump has said things like this, and in fact those exact words. And he talks about the enemy within, which is as we know, a very old political idea, something that politicians have used for a long time and been criticised for. But this idea of using the US military on domestic soil against American citizens, or at least people living in America, even if they're not American citizens, I think is quite concerning to voters. Previously, he said that he would deploy the army at the US border to stop people coming in who shouldn't be here, illegal migrants. And I think Americans have got a lot more truck with that. They can see that. I mean, that is US forces defending the frontiers of the country. Actually sending the military out on the streets, it's quite unclear how it would actually work, whether or not it would be constitutional. Presumably it would be challenged immediately in the courts. But I think this is a point about rhetoric, really, isn't it, rather than about policy. The point is, can you run a campaign as he's running, which is so heavily based on the demonization of a specific group of people, whether they're legal or not, and win? And can you convince your supporters that the true enemies are those living among us? Can you instill fear in the population? And it seems that it can. And he ran a very similar campaign in 2016, which worked, which won in the White House. And immigration has only become a more and more significant issue since then. We've seen record numbers of people crossing the border under Joe Biden, and he successfully made that, I would say, if not the top issue in this election, certainly, maybe the second after the economy. But as far as they're concerned, this is their top campaigning tactic, and Harris has not really got a particularly good answer as to what she would do differently.
Has anything changed really in the polling? Kamal and I discussed this earlier in the week. It seems as if some of these swing states are still on a knife edge. What's your sense of who's ahead, if either of these two candidates?
Well, we do see incremental shifts between the swing states, a point here, a point there, but the basic trend is continuing, which is that Kamala Harris has a narrow lead in the national polls, which actually don't tell us too much at all, because it is the swing states that will decide this race. And in those, by and large, she's had a slight lead in 4 out of the 7. Donald Trump's had a slight lead in the other 3. But it's, within a point or 2 in each. And actually, the quality of the polling that we have really varies. It is interesting that David Plouffe, who was Barack Obama's campaign manager in 2008 and is now a senior advisor to Kamala Harris's campaign, he actually came out recently and said, look, all of this public polling that you're seeing isn't of great quality. We don't pay attention to it. We know the campaigns have their own internal polling, which is far more substantive because they have the money to spend on that. And, he said essentially it's a neck and neck race, but we'd rather be on our team than on the red team at the moment as they see the data.
And of course, the election has started. The first votes are starting to come in. The postal votes are coming in. In Georgia, Rozina, we're going to get to your report in a second, but in Georgia, there have been record numbers of early votes. That's had a tendency to suggest that Democrats are out voting. Early postal votes have usually been connected to them being out in force. So that could be a slightly positive signal for the Democrats. But Rozina, you've been in Georgia, which has had this record early voting numbers. Tell us a bit about what you went there to do and talk us into the work that you've been covering.
Yeah, Georgia, as you say, a critical swing state in this election. It's a state that Joe Biden turned blue for the first time since Bill Clinton in 1992 in the last White House race. But it looks as if Donald Trump is making gains there against Kamala Harris. And Trump was actually in Georgia, in Atlanta, for the start of early voting. I went to his rally on Tuesday night. And he was encouraging his supporters to go out and vote early too, which is a difficult message for Donald Trump to swing after having cast aspersions on the security of early voting and mail-in voting. It's interesting being in Georgia, where African Americans are such a significant part of the electorate. They're about 30% of the electorate. It's one of the highest proportions of any US state, and a voting bloc that you would typically associate with being a Democratic voting bloc. But actually, we are seeing signs in the polling that a growing number of black voters are going for Donald Trump, and specifically young black men. And Donald Trump appealed directly to them at the rally that I was at on Tuesday night.
Rozina, you met a guy at that rally called Jimmy. He's 38. He said he would vote for Trump for a second time in November, basically saying that for him, the election is all about dollars and cents.
I just don't like Kamala. It's nothing about her as a woman. I love women, but I just don't like her. I just feel like she's just saying what needs to be said. I feel like she's being forced on people. There was no real election for her. She should have went to the primaries. I don't care about if she's black or white. At the end of the day, it's about who's going to put America first. I believe Trump is going to put American U.S. citizens first. I don't care about colors, anything like that. To me, I'm all about dollars and cents. At the end of the day, it's all about dollars and cents. I wish there was more than 2 parties.
Does that mean that you're not a fan of Trump's personality? You just like his policies? What do you mean by that?
No, I've always liked Trump as a person. I went to college with guys like him. He may not always say things the right way, but I believe in his heart, he really does care about putting this country back #1 in the world. I think a lot of black supporters of Trump are really underground or discreet with it, but I do believe when the polls come out, we'll really see. But I think right now it's just going to be on hush-hush because we just don't want to fight with our family about it. It's hard trying to convince your parents who've been voting for 30 years to, see something different. Black people are asking for tangible things that will help to make our lives better. Skills, education, clean, affordable food, housing, stuff like that. but a lot of it also comes down to reducing immigration, illegal immigration, because a lot of the things that black people have done in this country for a long time are now being done by illegal immigrants.
I visited a barbershop in Atlanta, and these barbershops are a bit like makeshift public squares in these communities, and the election was a fierce topic of debate. Just one man there confessed to being a Trump fan and got a real grilling for it.
We don't like Trump over here. All that police immunity and anti-abortion. I got too many side bitches not to believe in abortion.
Yeah, bro. We believe in abortion. Abortion saved lives, man.
So you're not a Trump fan?
No.
Do we have any? Are you a Trump fan?
He better than...
No, you're not. Talking about Trump. You was on thin ice. You was on thin ice in the barbershop.
But he do help the middle class people and try to help the poor people, but the poor people got to help themselves at the same time. I think he's more suitable than Joe Biden anyway.
My biggest problem with Trump is he don't respect the sacredness and the honorability of the office. It's like dude making a reality show instead of being a real politician or a government official. A national abortion ban, bro. Police immunity.
I don't like that part.
Police immunity.
That shouldn't be like that.
And what's the top issue for you?
Mainly comedy, because everything going up, and then they still don't go up on pay, which is crazy.
So the cost of living is a big concern for you?
Of course.
In terms of Trump as a person, do you like him on a personal level?
He's a cool person. He's just more on social media than any other president.
And what about Kamala Harris?
I think she should be more serious. She always laughing. She can't never answer a direct question, which is bizarre. But I think she needs more experience.
Incredible atmosphere there, Rozina. Really brilliant to hear those voices duking it out. It has been interesting, this possible not only racial split between black voters and white voters and young black men, but also a gender split. There's been some coverage, Tony, of this being a sort of male-female election where lots of men, not just young black men, but lots of men are going to find it very difficult to vote for a woman and vote for a black woman. Is that something that's going to actually play out, that we're seeing that Kamala Harris is going to find it difficult to seal the deal, so to speak, with male voters?
Yeah, well, I think it's difficult to say whether or not the reason that these men aren't interested in voting for Kamala Harris is because she's a woman. I think it's interesting that she's not made a big deal about the fact that she's a woman on the campaign trail. She doesn't really talk about it, perhaps because she's worried about exactly this. But yeah, there is a bit of a gender split going on. She is not performing as well with men as Joe Biden was. So even among Democratic men or men who voted Democrat last time, she's suffering a bit. She has performed better among women, especially young women. Gen Z women are becoming a huge voting bloc for her, more so than they were for Biden. But yeah, I think there is a bit of concern about the gender split here. I think that if you look at some of the campaign efforts that have been made on the Democratic side to attract men, you'll perhaps see the level of concern about it. There's this campaign, White Dudes for Harris, which is basically trying to convince white men that they should vote for her. And it reminds me slightly of that advert that Sadiq Khan has on Piccadilly Circus, the one that says, "Mate, you gotta go to your mates and you gotta come." This is kind of like blow-key attempt. Men need to convince other men that they should do the right thing. A very similar thing has happened with White Dudes for Harris. And Donald Trump actually addressed it last night. He was giving a speech. He said, "Well, I'm not so worried about this White Dudes for Harris campaign because although they might vote for her, their wives will all vote for me, and so will their wives others." That was his joke. The joke being sort of trying to play into the gender dynamic, I suppose. The suggestion obviously being that voting for Kamala Harris is a slightly emasculating thing to do. So I think he's playing on this dynamic, and it does appear to be working.
Tony, Rozina, lovely to see you. I shall be with you in Washington for the big night, but we will be speaking to you before then, I think, repeatedly as we bring the Daily Tea audience up to date with everything that's going on in the States.